what we're talking about today is how to get things done when your brain won't stay on task. Do you walk into another room and you go, wait, why am I in here? Or you're having a conversation and you're engaged until you're not engaged in that conversation anymore. Does this happen to you? So that's like the normal part of, being distracted, being busy, being preoccupied, whatever you want to call it. And so what we're talking about today is called executive function. And I explain it this way. Think of it like Jiminy Cricket, a little cricket that would sit on your shoulder. It's like your conscience. So your executive function is how it governs you. It's what keeps you from saying the things you're thinking and from doing and saying the things that in polite society that you wouldn't normally say. Right. So it governs your behavior, but it also has some other abilities. It's about planning, it's about following through. It's about following directions, working through a recipe, following the steps in a recipe. It's about planning your grocery list and writing them down. Executive function is kind of that pilot. It's that structure that helps you get things done. And when you have a stroke or a brain injury, a brain tumor, you have Parkinson's, primary progressive aphasia, any kind of neurologic condition, it can impact your executive function. And it can show up in lots of different ways. Like I said, not knock on wood, I don't have a neurologic condition. But when I was making that cake and I'm standing there looking in the fridge going, why am I here? That is part of executive function. I distracted myself. I didn't follow through. So when you notice these challenges, it's important to number one, acknowledge them. Number two, not only acknowledge them, but think, what am I going to do about it? Or maybe you notice in your loved one is demonstrating these things. Maybe they start a project but don't finish it. I was on a call this week, and this lovely wife I was speaking to was telling me about this project that her husband, who had had a stroke 3 years ago, he started 2 weeks ago this project to build a contraption to hold the hose. It looks like it's halfway done, but he never finished it. That's executive function. So, executive function typically lives in the front part of your brain. Okay, so let's do a little basic neuroanatomy. Left hemisphere, typically in a right handed person, this left hemisphere is what houses your language center. The right hemisphere has to do with concentration and creativity and music and math and, fun stuff like that. But you have this frontal lobe of your brain, which encompasses both the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. So even the smallest damage can throw that whole system off. So let me give you another example. One of my former clients, he was in his early 20s, college student, and he had executive function issues. And how those presented is he would walk upstairs to go get ready for bed, and he would see his baseball cards over on the table, and he'd just sit down and start working with his baseball cards, whatever it is one does with baseball cards, sorts them, puts them in plastic, those kinds of things. And next thing he would know, one of his parents is knocking on the door saying, "Hey, are you ready for bed?" And he had no idea what he did. He just went like as the wind blows, right? He walked upstairs, saw the baseball cards, got busy with that. He lost full track of what it was he was doing when he walked upstairs. That executive function helps us adhere to social parameters. It suppresses those things that we want to say or the things that we're saying in our head, but we don't say them out loud. Rachel is asking, I remind my mom what she is doing all day long. She says she's fine, but I see her struggle. How do I know if this is executive function or something else? Wow, Rachel, that is a fabulous question. So I think part of it is you need to look and see if there's a pattern. Is it a one off situation or it just happens every now and again? Or does it happen more consistently? So here's what some other things besides a neurologic condition can impact your executive function. You're sick, right? Have any of you tried to carry on a significant conversation when you're not feeling well? It's hard for you to pull your thoughts together and follow through with what you're trying to say. Did you get enough sleep? Are you distracted? Are there too many environmental things going on? All of those things pop up as executive function. So, Rachel, with your mom, look for a pattern. And if you feel like there is a pattern of executive function, whether or not she has a diagnosed neurologic deficit, maybe she had an old stroke, or maybe it's called a TIA, a transient ischemic attack, and you feel like she really fully recovered from that. Things like a concussion, like from a car accident or a sports injury, can impact your executive function. But there's these little things that happen, like maybe not following through with getting ready. Maybe she gets dressed in the morning and, leaves off some part of that process. So try and look at that. Try and look at her medical history and try and look and see what else is going on. For concerns like that, I would definitely have you bring it to the attention of your doctor. If you're seeing a pattern, please feel free to reach out to me. So there's a technique. It's something I've been certified in. It's called goal management training, and it's a great program for really helping with executive function, doing things like being present minded. It's easier said than done, but goal management training is a technique that I can work with clients to help them learn how to be present minded, to learn how to recognize when they drift, when they're having that conversation and they're thinking about the chickens in the backyard instead, and they realize they missed out on that conversation. That we teach techniques to bring back that distracted mind, the absent mindedness, to present mindedness. And so, with this former client of mine with the laundry, what she learned to do is set alarms. That was one of the most important things she learned for herself, to set an alarm and to label. When you set an alarm, you can put a tag or you can name it, right? So she set an alarm for, move the laundry to the dryer. When it goes off, she looks at her phone and she knows what she's got to do. But then she also has to remember that when that alarm goes off, she has to immediately stop what she's doing and go take care of it, and then come back and hopefully resume what she was doing, right? This is the challenge of executive function. And I give all of these examples because not only does executive function get impaired with neurologic insults, but it can happen to the rest of us day to day, right? So let's talk about Allison. So this is another story, and I've got my notes here because I don't want to forget some of these details. So Allison is going through a process of decluttering her house. She and her husband are getting ready to move. Because she's an overwhelmed care partner, she gets stuck with not making decisions. So she could be looking at these photos, and next thing she knows, she is getting psychologically, emotionally overwhelmed with, do I keep this? Or if I get rid of it, how do I get rid of it? So for her, executive function issues, because she's overstressed and tired, it's really hard for her to make decisions. It's hard for her to go, okay, I'm going to keep this photo, and then this photo can go in the box and, maybe pass that on to the next relative. So she can't make those decisions. But what worked for her, one strategy she did use, is she looked at her overall schedule. She knows that she gets overwhelmed with decisions. So what she started doing is called time blocking. She knows 3 different days a week when her husband is at rehab that she can spend an hour going through these items. And so she has pre-thought what her process is. What are the things she really wants to keep, and what are the things that she's going to let go? So she pre-thinks it. And then she time blocks so that from 12 to 1, and she sets a timer on her phone, and she commits to only doing that task. If the phone rings and it's her best friend, she doesn't answer it. She lets it go to voicemail. The only time she would stop what she's doing is if it's an emergency. So she has set her parameters for this time blocking, and she sits down and she works on it. And as she's working on it, and if she feels like she's doing something kind of repetitive, like she's moving the same pictures to the same pile, one right after another, and she's been doing this for a few minutes, she stops and she checks in. She just asks herself, either in her head or out loud, what am I doing? What am I focused on? And what that does is, because she realized she drifted off, she brought herself back to present mindedness. What is the task she's doing? Why is she doing it? What's the timer look like? And then she gets right back to it. And this is a strategy all of us can use. When you know you've got to get something done and you're super tired, and maybe there's a repetitive component of that task, bring yourself back to present mindedness. In your head, say stop. Bring yourself back. Think about what you're doing, why you're doing it, and then get back on task. Don't wait. Don't make excuses. Don't beat yourself up. That's important. Don't beat yourself up. Come back to the task. So these are just some of the practical strategies. So let's review them. You can pause and set your own intention before you get to the room. If you're leaving, like from the kitchen to the laundry room, before I even leave the kitchen, I'm going to get baking soda, and then go do it, and then come right back and get back on task. Write it down. Some people think that they are cheating, especially if they've had a stroke and they're or a brain injury and they're trying to recover. They feel like it's cheating to write things down. I want to give a different mindset to that. It's a strategy. It's a way to be more effective to get things done. So write it down. If a distraction pops up, if you carry your cell phone on you, write it down, add it to the notes, put it as a reminder, whatever the case is, it's there for you. Use the tools and the strategies you have available to you. Also, just like Allison was doing with that big decluttering kind of task and the sorting, she had to break it down into small pieces. She also used what's called time blocking. That's where you set aside a specific time to work on a specific task, and you make yourself stay on that task. Use an alarm if you need to. Whatever you're doing, check in with yourself. Am I still on track? If not, redirect yourself, refocus, and keep moving forward. Talk it, talk it over with someone else. Sometimes having an accountability partner or just chatting with a friend, you might say, sometimes I just lose track of what I'm doing. Does that ever happen to you? And when you put yourself out there and you say these things out loud, you're going to be surprised how everybody else feels like this happens to them too. And it's part of it's normal, and part of it is an issue if you've had some kind of neurologic event. But the good news is there are ways to treat it. There's ways to work through it. And then the last strategy I want to share is use verbal self talk. When I'm really tired and I've got to get something done, I just have to talk myself through it. Sometimes vacuuming is all I can do to not get to, if I'm trying to vacuum the whole house, number one, that's probably too big of a job because it takes a while. Maybe I just focus on one room at a time. Maybe that's my better strategy. I'm going to have to take that into consideration. Okay, so let's wrap up this episode. Executive function is about planning, organizing, focusing, starting and finishing tasks, and switching between activities. Think of it in real terms as Jiminy Cricket telling you, oh, you can't say that, right? And that's how you filter, that's how you say things in polite company, as just one example. Okay. Then we went through a lot of real life examples for normal everyday people and then those who have issues with neurologic conditions. For one of my clients, he loves to do these games. And what's interesting is if there is even 5, 6, 7 seconds of a pause in between other people participating with this game, his brain is off on something else and I have to completely bring him back, refocus him on the task. But what's cool is that with time he is learning to recognize when he drifts and he's starting to be able to bring himself back. So that's really exciting to see. This is a process. This is not why he's in therapy. This is just one of these situations that we use for carryover, for what we call generalization. But we can work on executive function. Thank you for being here. I appreciate those who came on live. And for those of you who are catching this on the podcast, thank you for being a part of the community. If I can support you, please reach out. Social media, email, through my website, however that is. Have a fabulous week